And we are back on the 0 Hour, broadcasting live and to digital equivalent of tape here at Netroots Nation 2016 in St. Louis, Missouri. And joining me now is someone who's been on the show before but never in real space. Carolyn Fiddler is the communications director for the Democratic Legislative Campaign Council, is it?
Committee.
Yes. Everything's a committee in the Democratic Party. Nothing's a council, nothing's an association. It's always a committee. Why is that? Carolyn, first of all, thank you for coming on the program.
I'm delighted to be here.
Why is everything a committee? Any idea?
I think just because traditionally that's the way campaigns are organized, even just the most granular state level. You have a campaign committee that is organized and established and raises money and files its paperwork. It's not just one person doing a campaign. It's not just one person getting Democrats elected to state legislatures. It is a group of people. I think it reflects that.
And to call any aggregation of Democrats an organization would be perhaps implying more structure than is inherent in any group of Democrats. You didn't say that, I did. Now, Carolyn, so you guys concentrate on state races,
We
right?
do.
See, I think that's so important. I think that one of the many areas, unfortunately, in which the right has its act together, in which corporate America and Koch brothers America has its act together, is that they've been going after state races like crazy, and then, of course, gerrymandering like crazy. So now we have a Congress that we can't deal with. So what are your big priorities as an organization for the year? I use the word organization. But
Our priorities are flipping at least 10 chambers this fall. And shoring up majorities in others and making inroads in others so we can make gains in 2018 and 2020 to not just win back Democratic power in these state legislatures to reverse these terrible policies that Republicans have been passing, to pass more progressive policies like we've seen in places like Oregon with Democratic majorities, but also to prepare Democrats nationwide for redistricting after 2020.
Yeah, I think that, I wish everybody who is a Democrat or a progressive, and of course there's a lot of overlap there, activists, would keep the number 2020 fixed in their minds because of the importance for the future of the future direction of politics. And it's interesting because I interviewed an author a couple weeks ago whose book can't be pronounced on the air, but
yes,
yeah,
I'm actually quoted briefly in that book. It's a really darkly fascinating book.
Yeah, rat effed would be the translation.
Yes.
And he talks about the fact that the Republicans have gotten very right-wing because they don't have to compete with a Democrat to get elected anymore.
Exactly.
They've jury-rigged things so much. That's how bad the system has gotten. So, and you follow politics at the state level in all 50 states, basically,
yes,
right?
It's a lot to keep up with. But it's always interesting, always something happening.
Well, what are some of the more interesting state political scenes right now? Where's some of the interesting action or just eccentric characters or whatever?
Well, right now we're in high campaign gear. Like earlier in the year, you have a lot of states are in their legislative sessions, and you see crazy bills happening, like say HB2 in North Carolina, which interestingly, North Carolina is one of the few states that's still having its legislative session right now. They're one of the late ones, and so they're making some changes, but nothing that actually makes the bill less hateful to the LGBT community.
And HB2, for those who don't know,
it is
the
terrible
infamous...
it's a terrible piece of legislation passed by Republicans during a special session they called just to pass this bill to strip protections away from transgender North Carolinians and also to basically enshrine discrimination against LGBT folks into state law.
Are you seeing this a lot around the country? And we're talking with Carolyn Fiddler of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. Are you seeing this a lot around the country that it seems to me that Republicans are back at their old trick of using fear and hatred of sexual minorities and gender and so on, divisiveness, in order to try to win state houses? It seems to me like they're back to that. Is that? Do you think that's what this is about?
In a way, they never got away from it. The interesting thing about Donald Trump is that everyone's pretty surprised by the terrible things that he says. State legislators have been saying these kinds of things for years. This isn't a surprise to me. It's just kind of gratifying to see it get more attention because it's on the national level now. Republicans have been fighting the bad fight ever since they swept into power after the GOP wave in 2010, and they've been implementing these terrible bills all over the country.
Now, are you seeing, to go to the upside for a minute, are you seeing any particular states where there's exciting kind of grassroots energy bubbling up to fight that and to come up with a more progressive alternative? Are there states where there's really action, movement?
Yes. There are a lot of good things happening in states, both electorally and also in terms of policy. I mentioned Oregon earlier as a state that's run by Democrats. They've been doing lots of good things in the past just year even, like expanding voting access. Automatic voter registration is now a reality in Oregon, and already over 200,000 new voters are on the rolls, and that is just great for democracy. And then you have places where Democrats are in the minority in the state legislature, but with this upswell of anti-bigotry sentiment in these places, anti-Trump, anti-whatever you want to call it, Democrats are registering in record numbers in places like Colorado, Nevada, even Arizona is seeing a huge bump in Democratic registrations. We're going to make big gains there this year.
Well, a couple thoughts about that. And again, we're talking with Carolyn Fiddler of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. One is, a lot of people forget when we talk about on the national level, in presidential races or perhaps in senatorial races, when people talk about, what the ideal country would look like in terms of a perfect example, automatic voter registration. It seems radical at the national level when you have somebody like Bernie Sanders saying everybody should be automatically eligible to vote when they're 18. We could run down a whole series of progressive policies or policies that would get people excited. I think a lot of times, I'm curious your thoughts about that. I feel as if a lot of people's emotional and mental energy, national races are vitally important, but I think people forget that you can get a lot of those things on the state level if you really fight and become active on the state level. And I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
That's exactly right. I mean, very few bills have been moving in Congress over the past 5-6 years, but thousands have been moving in the state legislative level and have become law. And Republicans figured out they're not, especially with a Democratic president, they're not going to get the abortion restrictions that they want. They're not going to get the LGBT oppressive measures that they want, but they're moving them in states instead where they have these majorities. They have these governors that will sign them into law, and they've been making it happen all over the country.
Yeah, and it seems to me, this is again why I really support the work that you guys do, because I think it's so important. And I somehow I feel as if people fall in love with or get attached to personalities at the presidential. Look, I worked for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign for a year, but I feel as if people get attached to Bernie or Hillary or whomever. I want people to get attached to universal voter registration.
Yes.
And then say, well, okay, how do I make that happen every day? Get up every morning and say, and it might be, let's have more Oregons. And now let's flip to the other topic that you brought up, which is the energizing potential of having. I agree with you, by the way, first of all, that I don't think Donald Trump is a departure from the Republican Party of the past with all this hatred. I think he's just a more direct about it.
Yes, exactly.
And so seems that you're saying it's mobilizing Democratic voter registration. Yes. Any particular places you're seeing that, or any places where people are creatively using that concern to register people?
In California, whereas obviously Democrats have good majorities there, but still we're seeing a real upswell in especially Latino registration in California, which is just a good sign generally. Right. Upticks in places like Texas, but the big ones, the real places that are going to create changes in the fall because we're going to flip those majorities are like Nevada and Colorado. Those are huge opportunities for us, where this anti-Trump sentiment has created real registration number changes in our favor. So.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And I also, by the way, I'm a big believer in increasing voter registration even where Democrats have a clear majority
Absolutely,
already.
Yes.
Because then we can argue over which policies are the most progressive,
right?
Rather than just trying to maintain our basic rights enshrined in the Constitution,
right.
which is
yeah.
where we're at now. So I guess I would also ask you, what are things people can do to get involved? You've got a lot of people who are mobilized by the Bernie campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a lot of people mobilized
so much
by
energy. Yeah.
Trump's negative energy and so on. What can people do with that?
The great thing about
feeling of involvement.
The great thing about state legislative campaigns is that it's so easy to make a huge difference on a campaign. A lot of these races are are small. These campaigns can be just like 2 staffers and the candidate sometimes, depending on like the size of the district, and district sizes vary all across the country. But in any state, you're going to be able to make a huge difference just by volunteering for your local state legislative candidate. You'll get to know the candidate, you'll get to know other people in your district, and you'll see the impact that you make every day.
Well, that's great. And then how can people find out more about your organization?
They can visit dlcc.org.
Well, that was easy. Okay. Well, let's end with this. I know, Carolyn, sometimes you have great, colorful stories about, I don't know, the Louisiana legislature or, some Texas or someplace.
Honestly, anywhere, any given week, there's going to be something colorful and interesting or possibly terrible happening somewhere.
Well, we've already talked about the terrible. That's the policy. So give us a good, colorful story before we go.
Oh, gosh.
I know you had the guy who brought the live chicken onto the...
Oh, gosh.
Wasn't
the floor. Yeah, and that was Louisiana. Yes.
Louisiana, yeah. What was that all about?
That was the rooster fighting bill. There was issue about whether or not they got to wear like boxing gloves essentially or some such thing. But I mean, it's an election year, and so one of the things I like hearing about is the stories of our candidates, like actually talking to real people and what they do, to not just like be in the state house and make laws and vote on things, but to actually get out there and get and be a part of their communities. Our chairman, Mike Gronsall, is the Senate Majority Leader in Iowa, and every time I see him this year, his knuckles are bloody. They're bruised from knocking on doors. He goes through multiple shoes every cycle. He's just knocking on doors because he knows it's important and he loves to do it.
Oh, I thought maybe you were going to say he was in Fight Club or something. The first rule of campaigning is you don't talk about campaigning. Well, listen, it's a delight to talk to you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person
I
after
love this,
interviewing you on the radio. And keep up the great work.
Thank
Carolyn
you so
Fiddler,
much.
a Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee.
That's us.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.